Outside Nazareth, Israel, buried under 12 meters of rock and sediment, there is a grave. It belongs to a child, roughly 12 or 13 years old. The child died approximately 95,000 years ago, 55,000 years before the earliest cave paintings in Europe, 90,000 years before Stonehenge. And yet whoever buried this child did not simply put the body in the ground and walk away. They dug a recess into the rock. They placed the child inside, legs drawn up toward the chest. Then they laid the branching antlers of a fallow deer, freshly severed, heavy, carried there deliberately across the child's hands and chest. Around the body they pressed lumps of red ochre into the soil, 71 pieces in total, staining the earth the color of blood. We don't know the child's name. We don't know the cause of death. We don't know what language the people who buried this child spoke, or what they believed happened after someone died. But we know they believe something, because you don't carry deer antlers and red pigment into a cave for a body you plan to forget. This site, Qafzeh Cave, excavated intensively by French and Israeli archaeologists through the 1960s and 1970s, would eventually yield 15 individuals in total, 8 of them children. It is currently considered one of the earliest undisputed cemeteries in the world, and it forces a question that sounds simple but opens into something enormous. When did humans start caring what happened to their dead, and why? Here's the paradox. Every other animal on Earth, with vanishingly rare exceptions, leaves its dead where they fall. A herd of elephants will pause, touch a fallen member, sometimes stand around the body for hours. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying dead infants for days, but intentional burial, digging a hole, placing a body inside with intention, adding objects, that is, as far as we can determine, exclusively a human behavior, or it was. Until recently, the assumption was that formal burial arrived with fully modern human cognition, sometime after 50,000 years ago. Before that, nothing. The dead were left to the elements, to scavengers, to time. What the archaeological record has now forced scientists to reckon with is far stranger. Formal burial appears earlier than anyone expected, in populations we didn't think capable of it, and in forms that suggest not just disposal of a body, but something closer to ceremony, something closer to grief. The question isn't only what ancient humans did when someone died, it's what that behavior tells us about when we became the kind of creature that needed to do something at all. The Qafzeh child, I catalogued as Qafzeh 11, is not the oldest burial candidate on record, but it is the clearest. Intentionality is the hardest thing to prove in archaeology. A body in a hole could mean burial. It could mean a pit used for other purposes, a natural depression, an animal disturbing the sediment. What separates deliberate burial from accidental preservation is the presence of objects that serve no practical function in a grave. Deer antlers laid across a child's hands serve no practical function. 71 pieces of imported ochre serve no practical function. The shells found at Qafzeh, glycymerous bivalves, naturally perforated, carried from the Mediterranean coast 35 kilometers away, serve no practical function. They are, by any standard definition, grave goods, objects chosen, carried, and placed with intent. And the scale of that intent matters. 35 kilometers is not a casual walk. Someone or a group of people made a deliberate journey to the sea, collected shells, and brought them back to bury with the dead. That is planning. That is meaning-making across distance and time. Now move approximately 1,200 kilometers northwest to the Zagros Mountains of what is now Iraqi Kurdistan. In Shanidar Cave, excavated by Columbia University archaeologist Ralph Solecki between 1951 and 1960, the remains of 10 Neanderthals were uncovered, a species that died out around 40,000 years ago and shared at most about 2% of its DNA with modern non-African humans. They were emphatically not us. In 1960, Solecki's team lifted a block of earth containing the bones of a male Neanderthal, designated Shanidar 4, who had died between 60,000 and 70,000 years ago. When pollen specialist Arlette Leroy-Gourhan analyzed soil samples from around the skeleton 8 years later, she found something that stopped the scientific community cold. The sediment around the body was loaded with concentrated pollen clusters, not scattered grains from airborne drift, but dense groupings from at least 8 flowering plant species: hollyhocks, grape hyacinths, bachelor's buttons, groundsel, yarrow, many of them with known medicinal properties. Solecki's interpretation, published in the journal Science in 1975, was that Shanidar 4 had been buried on a bed of flowers, that a Neanderthal community, a species with a brain smaller than ours in volume, with no record of symbolic art, with tools we had long considered primitive, had gathered flowers and laid them over one of their dead. Here's what most people don't realize. That interpretation has been systematically challenged ever since, and the challenge has never been fully resolved. In the decades following Seleki's publication, researchers pointed out something he had no way to account for in 1975: burrowing rodents. Specifically, a Persian gird, a small gerbil-like animal still common in that region, is known to cache seeds and plant material in underground tunnels. Seleki's team had documented rodent burrows near Shanidar 4. The pollen clusters, some scientists argued, could have been deposited by animals, not grieving Neanderthals. More recently, researchers from the University of Cambridge, Liverpool John Moores University, and University of London conducted a fresh analysis of Shanidar Cave, published in 2023. They found modern pollen clumps in the surface sediment, deposited, they concluded, most likely by bees or by people visiting the cave with pollen on their clothing and shoes. The flowers, in other words, might be noise, natural contamination, not ceremony at all. But here's where it gets strange. The flower controversy almost obscures what is not in dispute about Shanidar, that Neanderthals buried their dead at all. William Rendu, a paleontologist at New York University, led a 13-year reanalysis of La Chapelle-aux-Saints in southwestern France, where a 50,000-year-old Neanderthal skeleton was found in 1908. His team's results, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, concluded definitively that Neanderthal was intentionally buried, not carried there by water, not deposited by scavengers, placed in the ground by members of his own community. Can't be raised because we can't, and in some cases, because we shouldn't. The flowers might be wrong. The burial itself is not. Two species, two continents, both putting their dead in the ground with intention, long before we thought either was capable of it. In the collection at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History, there is a cast of what remains of the Shanidar 1 skeleton, a different individual from the same cave found earlier. His bones tell a story separate from any burial controversy. His right arm had been amputated or lost above the elbow. His right eye socket shows evidence of a healed blow that likely left him partially or fully blind in that eye. He had severe arthritis throughout his body. He was, by the time he died, somewhere between 35 and 50 years old by Neanderthal standards, and he had been living for years, possibly decades, in a condition that would have made hunting, foraging, and self-defense nearly impossible. He did not die young. He survived. Eric Trinkhaus, a paleoanthropologist at Washington University in St. Louis who has spent decades studying Neanderthal remains, has pointed out what this implies: that someone took care of him, that the community he lived in fed him, sheltered him, did not leave him behind when his body could no longer keep up. This was not an animal leaving a wounded member to die. This was something else, something that requires a category we recognize. We call it, when we do it, compassion. These sites, taken together, dismantle something most of us carry without examining it: the idea that the capacity to care for the dead arrived late, as a kind of finishing touch on human civilization, an add-on once the survival basics were handled. The data say the opposite. Professor Ella Bean of Ono Academic College, who in 2024 published a study in L'Anthropologie analyzing 17 Neanderthal and 15 Homo sapiens burials from across the Levant region, found that both species buried their dead regardless of age or sex. Infants, children, the elderly. No one was excluded. Both included objects: animal remains, stone tools, pigment. Both treated the act of death as something requiring a response beyond disposal. The red ochre at Qafzeh, the color of blood, placed with intent, appears at burial sites across multiple continents, from Africa to Europe to Asia, across tens of thousands of years of separate human populations who had no contact with each other. It is one of the most consistent behaviors in the entire archaeological record of our species. Nobody told each of these populations to use red. Nobody sent them instructions. They arrived at the same gesture independently, which means the impulse behind it, the need to mark a death as significant, to surround the body with something that means something, isn't cultural. It's deeper than culture. It may be closer to what we actually are. Anthropologist Agustin Fuentes at Princeton University has described burial as evidence of a kind of niche construction Humans shaping their environment not just physically but symbolically, creating a world where death has a place, a form, a ritual container. And once you do that, you have also necessarily created a belief about what death is, about what the person who died was, about whether anything of them continues. You don't bring flowers or antlers or ochre or shells from 35 kilometers away to something you believe simply ends. Somewhere in the Zagros Mountains, 65,000 years ago, a community of Neanderthals stood around a body. We don't know what sounds they made. We don't know if they had a word for grief or if what moved through them could be called by any name we'd recognize. We know only what they left in the ground, a body positioned with care in a place they returned to, soil that, when tested millennia later, still held the trace of something placed there with intention. Ralph Solecki, who first excavated Shanidar Cave and spent decades arguing that those flowers were real, died in 2022 at the age of 101. He never saw the debate fully settled. His trenches, left open, filled with rubble. Someone else eventually had to reopen them, which is, in its own way, the oldest human story there is. The dead leave questions the living spend lifetimes trying to answer. And in the trying, in the digging, the analyzing, the arguing over pollen and ochre and antlers, we are doing exactly what the people at Qafzeh did. We are refusing to let the dead simply disappear. We are insisting they meant something. We have been doing this for at least 95,000 years. We have never stopped.